It's like glued together, so it's not going to make it seem right. But when you go back like this, that's a posterior rotation. You see what happened to the greater trochanter? It goes superior, right? What's that going to do to the leg? Make it short. You can have a situation where the pelvis goes this way. What's that going to do to the leg? It can go long. So you can get what they call a PI ilium, posterior and inferior, because they're referring to the PSIS as your landmark. Also, there's a number of anatomical landmarks that were in the notes that, I'm not sure how much of that I'm going to specifically kind of go over, but it's your responsibility to be responsible for landmarks. Orthopedic tests, which we'll not go over today, but in the context of the midterm. I'm not going to really introduce, again, muscle tests in this quarter, because enough is enough, although there may be a couple that relate to spinal outflow. Just make sure that you don't forget those. But next quarter, you'll be responsible for orthopedic tests and muscle tests, as well as the extremity manipulations and like that. So by using palpation, again, in a static context, you can get information about what's going on. And then I'm going to introduce the motion palpation, which gives you another level of information about evaluation. So to do leg length evaluation, when a person gets on the table, patient, which, history, PTR, my back hurts, I did this, I did that, I did the other thing, and you get ready for an evaluation. Typically, a patient for a new visit and stuff like that should be, in a gown or some way in which you have, good access so that you can palpate and can evaluate what's really kind of going on. So then they get on the table. Now, sometimes when a patient gets on the table, they don't get on kind of in that perfect kind of way, because they could be kind of like this. So already something's like off. And so one of the ways that you can have a person, they have tables called high-low tables. There's an example of one in the back behind the blackboard, that it goes up and then it comes down like this. And so a person stands on a platform and the table just takes them down. And so they're kind of in a standing position when they're therefore laying down. Because the person gets on, they kind of adjust themselves, and that can have an impact on the leg length. So one of the ways to get around that in a table like this is you have the patient kneel on the table. And it's also important, scoot back a little bit more, Trisha. When you make the evaluation of the leg length, you're going to want to use your thumbs on the inferior medial malleolus. All right, so now the patient's lined up, and you can see the femurs are lined up on the table, and they just kind of lay back straight down. Now, because it's easier to evaluate the malleolus with their legs kind of hanging off, so they're in a rather than if she was laying on the table like this, and the legs are up like that, it's kind of harder to evaluate the malleoli. Now, it's important also that they don't turn their head, because if they turn their head, that can affect leg length. So you want to keep sure that their head is straight. So in this case, it's not going to take very long for me to determine leg length. So once I do, then I'd ask the patient to go ahead and pull up so they can put their face in the nose hole and like that. Okay, so we're not being cruel about not being sensitive to where their head is. So I'm going to use my thumbs, palpate the inferior aspect of the medial malleoli. I like to bring the legs together and then kind of push up a little bit so I'm like locked in on that landmark. And then really what I'm looking for is what's the position of my thumbs, rather than actually the position of the malleoli, because when I make that contact, then my thumbs really are part of the malleoli. And so you can scoot up now. So as you can see, it's not just quite as easy when the legs are like that. So this one was a little bit shorter, which, again, there's a variety of reasons why that could have been, how they got on the table, or so on and so forth. And I'm going to show you the Deerfield, which is the technique to kind of take out the artifact of how they might have gotten on the table, or also to accommodate for a functional short leg. But a couple of the other assessments that you can do is you can palpate the density of the Achilles tendon. Does it feel a little bit more dense, or fatter, so to speak, bigger, and or if there is sensitivity? And so I'm going to go along the Achilles tendon. So posterior to the malleolus, I just kind of pinch in there. Is this sensitive at all, Trisha?
Yeah.
How is it over here?
Not as much.
Not as much. So her right Achilles tendon feels a little thicker. It's a little bit more sensitive. So these are giving me indications that this could be a short leg that's reactive. Reactive just means that it has symptoms. So the Deerfield test is you would take the ankles, bring them up, and then re-look at the malleoli to see if they've changed position. So if they don't change when you bring them up, it usually means it could be a anatomical short leg. If it changes position when it goes up, it could be considered to be a functional short leg. And then I'm going to demonstrate how you would do this also in a supine position, which is what I use more specifically to evaluate whether it's really functional or anatomical. So these are some of the things that you would do for an evaluation. You can also just kind of palpate the tone of the muscles or perhaps the sensitivity of the muscles, and that could also give you an indication that this could be the reactive leg or the leg that's the problem. So now we're going to do that, and then the other thing is just to palpate the spine. We've done this already. 2 fingers on each side of the spine is process coming down. I'm getting information about kyphosis and scoliosis and lordosis, but the important thing is now as I get down into the pelvic region, my hand is here, right? So patient, because as you'll come to find, it's not so easy to find the PSISs as you might think. And so if you just kind of dive in and use your thumbs and you're just poking butt, it doesn't feel good. So your hand is here, it has a reason to be there, then you can kind of separate. Then when I'm pushing down with my palms, I can feel the PSISs. It's like, there they are. It helps me to localize. Then I can translate that into my thumbs. And then as I evaluate, are my thumbs level? So this is an example of horizontal leveling. And again, we want to use your dominant eye. So when I do that, my right eye is my dominant eye, so I'm kind of looking over it with my right eye to see are they level or not. And in this case, it appears that the right PSIS is a little inferior, which would accommodate the fact that there may be a posterior rotation, which could have accommodated that she has a short leg. I can also evaluate the iliac crests. So I find the crest, and then I flare my hands out like this, so I can get, again, horizontal leveling. And I can see, are they equal or not equal? I can find the shelf of the greater trochanter. You remember I talked about what the shelf is? It's not the actual pin, the most lateral point. It's that top shelf. That sounds like a margarita. And then I can flare out like that and also evaluate. Now, in a perfect world, all of those indicators would be positive. In a clinical world, quite often they are not. So you might have 5 out of 7, 3 out of 5, or whatever the indicators that you're using that kind of lean you to that direction to say, I think this is the problem side. Okay, so those were the static evaluations. So we've got leg length, prone, medial malleolus thumb, Deerfield test, the static landmarks, PSIS, iliac crest, GT is greater trochanter, and a supine patient would be the ASIS. Yes, Tony.
So the thickness of the Achilles tendon, and so you're saying that the short leg would have a thicker.
Yeah.
Why is that?
If it's a short leg, here's how you're walking. Right?
Yeah.
It's short, so that
So
impacts
you're not
over time.
You're not stretching.
It just tends to become reactive and thickens up.
Okay.
Now you may not find that in an individual, or you may find that the long leg has a thick one, because maybe that's more of the problem, because that's the one that hits kind of first, right? So sometimes this stuff can go either way.
Okay.
There's not really, as you.
So you need a combination of things.
You need a combination of things. You're looking for the majority rules, and then also taking into consideration joint play, which I'm going to do next. And so, in a prone position. So, to do joint play, this is giving you that information about joint surface gliding over each other for the sacroiliac joint, right? So for the SI joint, my cephalad hand is going to go on the PSIS. My caudad hand, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the PSIS kind of between my thenar and hypothenar eminence. And so it lays kind of flat. My other hand, my caudad hand, the pisiform, or the hypothenar area, goes on the sacrum. So what that looks like on the model here, Trisha, I'm just going to lay this on your back. That's a pretty bad spine. So one hand goes like this, so it's on the PSIS. The other hand goes on the sacrum right here. Right, so it's like this, and it's like that. So your caudad hand is always going to be medial to your cephalad hand because that's just the anatomy. So once I get evaluation here, I'm going to go to the other side. This hand just slides over. This hand just slides over in the same context. And then I'm going to make a springing motion like this. So my elbows are relatively straight. My movement is coming from my shoulder balls, and I'm pushing straight into the table. kind of like ilium sacrum, ilium sacrum, ilium sacrum, ilium sacrum, right? So it's springing, it's bouncing, it's boing, 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 boing. Then and my fingers are basically pointing away from me, and I'm standing square or perpendicular to the patient. So then it becomes very easy to just slide over here, repeat the procedure.
Okay, wait. On the first time, are you doing it right smack in the middle, or you
No, this hand is on the PSAS, this hand is on the
But
sacrum.
I mean the first time.
This hand's on the PSAS, this hand's on the sacrum.
The different sides.
Right side, left side.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm checking each sacroiliac joint.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay?
I gotcha.
I've seen students they come and they do all these kind of weird things, and their hands are in kind of funky positions. Ultimately, whatever works, works. But what I found to be the simplest is just to kind of do this, and your hands just kind of go back and forth. One of the things that happens is that sometimes when you're evaluating your patient, they might be expecting or anticipating, oh, this is going to hurt. They tighten up. And you kind of do this, and it's like, oh, that's not so bad. And they kind of relax. So sometimes I'll go like this the first time, and it's like, man, that's like a rock. I'll come over here and go, oh, that's all pretty springy. Then I'll come back over here and go, oh, now this is pretty springy again. Like they relaxed up. So I want to go back and forth several times, and then I can average. And then I can say, oh, now that I've kind of taken out that artifact of anticipation, that one side or the other side is restricted and or fixated. So that would be, again, in the perfect world, if there's a posterior rotation, it's also going to have an accompanied fixation. Okay, so that's the joint play component of the evaluation. Now let me have you turn over on your back. So this is to make an evaluation supine for leg length. Again, you want to observe, you make sure your patient's on the table straight, because sometimes they get on there and they're just kind of there like that, So you just kind of get them. Sometimes I just lift the legs up like this, kind of swing them, and kind of get them straight. It is not so critical when they're laying supine where their legs are, because their legs are already kind of pointed up, right? So it's not as critical as it is prone, where they should be hanging off the edge of the table. Same thing. I'm going to find the medial malleoli, and then I'm going to put a little bit of pressure cephalad, and this is also in the notes, to see, is it shorter or is it longer? Now, one of the ways to eliminate aspects of artifact is to have the patients bring their legs up, lift your pelvis off the table, bring it back down, straighten them back out, and that kind of gets out of some of that artifact of how they got on the table, so you get a better look. Also, both prone and supine, just make sure you get, pants and all kind of stuff, out of the way. Or obviously, if somebody's got boots on, take them off, so you can kind of really evaluate that. I also, as I mentioned, bring the legs together, because if I'm out here, my line of sight doesn't give me the same discriminate information as this does, okay? Now, if there is a short leg, and I've done the clearing with the leg up, now, the next test is called the supine to seated test. So in this case, I'm going to have the patient go ahead and come do a sit-up for me. So I kind of make sure that they can get up, because sometimes when people have low back pain, they really can't. And as she's doing that, I'm kind of evaluating Linders and Lermites, right? So, you're using your head. So now I'm able to recheck the leg length to see if it's changed. So, and then this was in the notes. If a person has a short leg due to pelvic imbalance or pelvic asymmetry, when they are laying down, their trochanters are lined up a certain way. Then when they sit up, it makes that trochanter and that alignment push it forward. So what happens is if it is a functional short leg, that leg will lengthen. If it's an anatomical short leg, it will stay the same length. So for example, if Dr. Trishad, she still had a right short leg when I evaluated her, when she's now done the supine to seated test, her leg length is equal. So that indicates that there was an imbalance. So a leg will get longer. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get all the way longer or get longer than the other one, but it will lengthen. All right, so still it might end up being short, but less short. You can also, as I mentioned in class, you can take x-rays and measure the bones. That's like the gold standard, but that's also like a lot of radiation. So another functional measurement is to go from the greater trochanters, that most lateral point, to the lateral malleoli, or you can go from the ASIS to the medial malleoli and measure those and compare side to side. They should be, fairly equivalent. If it's a millimeter or two, that might not be a big difference. If it's like, several millimeters or a centimeter, then is an issue. You can lay back down again for sure. So the other thing that you can use in a supine position as well is find the ASISs, and then look at the ASIS. Right? So those are the landmarks. So one of the things that's interesting is that when somebody's laying down, it's easy to find. When somebody kind of rolls over or changes position, because we'll do a couple other things standing. So things get like, whoa, really? So let's do that first. You all have an understanding of what we're going to run through. So this is just to get evaluation